Okay, now we're going to go back in and work on the foreground. So I'm going to use yellow, a little bit of orange, yellow, and a lot of white to make a warm tabletop color. I'm going to exaggerate the warmth a little bit in the front. You don't want to go bright yellow, but a little bit of that orange, a tad bit of the blue to neutralize it, and a lot of white. I'm using a big brush again. I'm looking at my picture, and I'm going to start right where that brighter area is, where the light's coming in. Going right up to my objects, and remember, if it's a table, then you should drag your brush across. You can go up into the areas, you know, like up against the pumpkin, but remember, at the end of the day, your brush stroke should mimic what the table actually feels like. So I'm just taking pure white on the upper left corner of the table because I want it to feel cooler in temperature. And I'm blending those two things together. And I'll go back into it to show even more cool temperature in that left corner. I'm using a lot of paint so that when I do go back into it with shadows, excuse me, I can blend. So I'm taking a little bit of that light blue that we used in the background. I have a little bit left, and I'm just going right over the white that I put down, and I'm blending it into it and bringing it out from the background into the foreground. And the reason for this is that the background color would reflect into the foreground, especially because it is a lighter color. So this is a reflective color that we're doing. You know, you can go heavier with it, you know, start subtle and then just see how far you can push it based on what you're seeing in your image. And I also like the exaggeration of the cooler against the cool temperatures against the warm. It creates more of that depth and perspective. So I'll do the right side too with the same sort of blue temperature. I'm using a little bit of black on the right side into a light blue and using that cream color that we made. And I'm going to start with the right side and just go up to my shadows. Because the right side has a lot more of that blue-gray reflected into the tabletop because it's in shadow. I can just bring that shadow out. And then bring the kind of buttery white color over it and blend it together. If you feel like your brush gets too dirty at this point, just take a paper towel or a cloth and wipe it off. So I'm just smoothing out some of these areas, making sure that there's no little things that come up and distract. So I'm mixing a little bit of shadow color. So I'm using the blue and the black. For this front shadow. Now I notice that the shadow is darker towards the object, and as the shadow moves away from the object, it becomes diffused by light, and we start to see more of the blue reflection in the shadow from the background. So in order to get a diffused shadow, I have to take the background or the foreground color, that buttery gray color that we made, and go over the shadow. I'm using a smaller brush right now. I'm using like a medium brush. So I'm going to go back over it a few times, and I'm going the direction of the shadow, which is basically at a diagonal. And I'm making sure that, you know, there's still that darker area in the front, but as it goes towards the back, it becomes diffused and bluer in temperature. And there's a lot of, when you're doing these sort of shadows to soften the edges and also create hard edges where there needs to be hard edges, there's a lot of give and take with the paint. So you might find yourself wiping off your brush or bringing in a clean brush to blend the edges. So it may take you longer than what I have on this video, but it's worth it to get it right. The back shadow has more blue in it, so I'm going to take the blue from the background and again go right into that back shadow. So the back shadow is softer and bluer and lighter, and it's also diffused as well. It meets up with that shadow that we laid in before. I'm going to take the gray and soften the edges with it as well. So I don't want to have too much paint, so I'm wiping a little off. And if you feel like you're going into the background, you could use a piece of tape to control that line. So just softening the shadows, making sure it goes up to the objects, and gently blending it. I'm adding a little bit more blue on the right. I feel like, you know, I could go a little bit heavier with the blue, and that'll also make it feel like it's more in shadow. And I can just bring that color in the front and clean up any like rough edges. You either have a very hard edge or a soft edge with a shadow. And sometimes a lost edge. So like I said, this is a lot of give and take. You're going to be adding in and subtracting and blending and then redefining. I'm taking a clean brush that's totally dry and I'm just softening that edge. Sometimes just a clean brush is really easy to blend with. Now I want to do the shadow underneath the squash in the front. So I'm using orange and kind of a blue-black mixed together. I'm getting brown, but I want it to be a warm gray brown. If you look at the picture, you can see that there is a little bit of brown in the shadow. So finding the right color, you have to really play around with these mixes. I've got like a neutral brown here. I'll see if that works. Add a little bit of red into it, but I'll see if it works. And if not, I can change it. So it's just a very small shadow underneath the front squash. We don't want it to be too bright. That's why I added the blue to it to neutralize it. So I'm adding a little bit more blue. It feels a little bright to me, so I'm going to neutralize the color a bit without completely neutralizing it. There has to be some warmth to it. And I'll bring these two shadows together. And as the shadow comes out from underneath that squash, there's a little bit of light coming through, so it softens out on the edge. And that's where bringing in some of that butter color to soften and blend it comes in handy. There's a little bit right here. Not a lot, but a little. So I'm just taking a clean brush with some white to really define that edge. And I noticed that right there, there's a little bit of more yellow reflecting, so I'll just put in more of the yellow buttery color right up to it. And this is where you can clean up your edges. Now the next part is that shadow right up next to the pumpkin is also brown. It's a little bit darker than the one we have in front of it. It's brown, and then right below it, kind of a red-brown on the left side. So I'm going underneath the pumpkin. There's a bit of a black shadow underneath it I'm leaving so that it feels like it's sitting down more. And then in the negative space between the squash in the front and the pumpkin, there is a bit of light coming through, so I'll mix a little bit of color for that too. Clean up this edge with the background color, or I'm sorry, the foreground color. That butter, soften that shadow a bit. And then I'll use a little bit of that same color with the blue in it and do the negative space. And just like touch up any details. You know, I lost a little bit of that line. So I'll soften that up, add it in. With my blue-black combination. And then I'll move on.